This is from chapter 7, where I'm talking about how we can use the same techniques that are used in writing to unlock ideas about characters. We can use the same thing with world building. Imagine I want my character to have a gun in the next scene, and she doesn't really have a simple way to get one. I need to explain this because, as discussed in the last chapter, it's the lack of acknowledgement of the unreality that makes stories feel hollow. I might solve this by having a character who can give her a gun. If I just write John handed Jane a gun, it's not very compelling. I need to know more about John, and I have a great starting point. He has a gun. It's not much to go on, but then I can start asking questions. Why does John have a gun? Well, he got it for self-defense. Why does he need it for self-defense? Well, he lives in a poor neighborhood. Why does he live in a poor neighborhood? Because the villain destroyed it. So then I might write, John handed Jane a gun. Go get him, he said, with a shadow behind his eyes. Jane knew that Dr. Despair had taken a lot from the young man when the treacle floods had come and turned the western city into a hellhole. Now we know a lot about John, and the scene has a lot more weight, and the gun means something, and so does the passing of it, which is what we want. The art of good writing, of good creation, is to waste nothing, to create the most meaning with the smallest touches. That example shows you how well the question of why works, but it's not essential that you ask why. Let's try some different questions. What kind of gun does John have? A service revolver from his time as a soldier. What kind of soldier was he? Well, he was a regular infantryman. What kind of service history did he have? It was brutal. He saw many men die. So now we have John hands Jane a gun, a simple army revolver. Jane knew it was a standard issue for the trench soldiers. She'd heard the stories of how brutal those battles had been and saw John's hand shake a little as he let go of the sidearm. Jane pretended not to notice. We can try another kind of question. When was John a soldier? During the recent war against the Alendi. When did that war end? Last year, but it feels like forever since then. When did John sign up? As soon as his father was killed. John handed Jane a gun, standard military issue, but old-fashioned. Jane must have looked puzzled. She'd assumed John would have objected to the fighting. This was my father's, he said, with a click in his throat. You don't have to use the same question, of course. You can mix and match at will. And we can go past 3 questions, too, if we hit a vein. When did John get a gun? Well, he always keeps one in his desk. Where does he keep it in his desk? Bottom drawer. Hidden. He's maybe not supposed to have it. Why keep it there? His wife won't allow it in the house. Why won't she allow it in the house? Her father killed her mother with a gun. When was that? After her father came back from the trenches. Is this the same gun? Now we have John taking a gun from his father and let his father go into hiding and told the police that the murder was a random intruder. John handed Jane a gun that he pulled from the bottom drawer of his desk. That was definitely against regulations, which seemed unlikely for someone as careful as John. You've got to have protection around here, he added, as if by way of explanation, then acted as if the question was settled. You might have to go a long way past 3 questions. If you haven't hit something that means something, that paints a vivid, commanding picture, something that excites you and begs to be told, then you have to keep digging. You have to dig and dig and dig until you hit the goal. Let's try it again. Why does John have a gun? Well, to keep him safe in the poor neighborhood. Why does he live in a poor neighborhood? Because he doesn't have much money. Why doesn't he have much money? Well, because he never got a good job. Maybe we're going in circles here. Why didn't he get a good job? Well, because he never got an education. Well, why didn't he get an education? His parents wanted him to go into a trade. Why did they want him to go into a trade? Well, they were poor as well. But he could have had an education. Yes. Yes, he could have. Why? Because he was smart. So did his parents take away his chances? Yes. So does he resent his parents? Yes. Can he forgive his parents? Often you'll know you'll hit a great question when you don't know the answer. A question without an answer isn't a dead end. In fact, it is exactly what you want. A question without an easy answer is one that can be explored, one that can define the whole character and be the meat of a whole story. In that example, there was a period where the questions weren't going anywhere in particular. Rather, they were just restating the question in different ways. However, if you keep restating the question, you will likely find a new way to ask it to get into a deeper question. Also note these questions are only about a minor side character, so it may not matter a great deal what secret John is keeping. If it was a major character, however, learning more about them might change a lot more than just one scene. You might need to rethink or even write large sections of your story. So for major characters, and for worlds, you want to do as much of these kind of questions in the planning phase. With worlds, the planning phase is going to take longer than it does with characters and plot. Worlds need long development cycles where the questions and the things that they connect to probed over and over again, and the ripples that the answers send out checked and rechecked. This is true at every step from the early brainstorming to the final touches. You'll also note that some of our examples above do a lot of world building, because characters and worlds interact just in the same way that characters do with other characters. And just as character changes have ripples, so do world changes. And worlds change characters, and characters change worlds. Everything about your characters impacts your world. Everything about your world impacts your characters. You can indeed to make sure that the questions you're asking are actually about your world by directing your focus there. Why does John have a gun? Well, everyone does. Well, why does everyone have a gun? Because this is a dangerous town. Guns are cheap, they're easy to get, and they keep you safe. What does that mean? Well, there's got to be some sort of level of industry to support that, and perhaps a local military. But there's also got to be maybe a level of lawlessness. The key question there of what does that mean is a great question. That question then digs down into the world building logic. When it comes to worlds, every idea we can serve up implies a million other things. Everything has an implication. Everything has a consequence. Even the smallest, simplest things in our world do, because everything is connected in our worlds. If Jim has a gun, what does that mean? What assumptions have we made? What assumptions are a part of those assumptions? Well, if there's a gun, then steel exists, or some similar metal, or something like it. Gunpowder needs to exist, or something like it. Or does it? Some mining must exist to get gunpowder and get metal to make steel. Some sort of precision construction exists. Perhaps mass production exists. Could you make a gun? Yeah. Now we can ask if any of those things stand up. If it's not metal, could it be made of wood, glass, an elven plant gun, an alien biological gun? If gunpowder doesn't exist, could it fire some magical explosive? Could metals not be mined, in fact, at all, but be collected from the air or extracted from animals or harvested from long dead technology? Could guns be extremely unreliable because they aren't made from precision construction? Could there only be a few guns in existence in the world because there isn't mass production? Could they run on intricate clockwork only available to the vastly wealthy, able to precisely machine produce the parts? Does Jim have the only gun ever made? And is he being hunted by those who want it back? See how simple questions can cause incredible consequences and even more questions. And that's just simply on the material things. We could also ask political questions. Why does John have a gun? Well, he fought in the war. What war? It was this war between his nation and the Conclave. When was that war? How long did it last? Who won? How did they win? What did they win? Why didn't Why didn't they go to war before the start of the war? What's stopping the war from starting again? That's the beauty of this technique. Once you turn on this tap, it never stops. Every single thing you add to your world has a next step waiting to serve up something else. Every question you answer only leads to another question. We may even have too many questions. So far, we're still working with John and Jane, and you can do this with every character you might find in your world. But of course, for the most part, we are not starting with characters. We will have characters very quickly because we are building a game, and that means players will need to take on an identity, which we'll talk about in another chapter. Even if our characters are two gigantic nations or ancient cosmic enemies, These are still characters and we can start questioning. But you don't have to start with a character. You can choose a concept, an idea, or an image. Let's do some examples. Let's take one above. We said, well, metals must exist, so that they must come from mining. Maybe not. Where do metals come from? Well, let's say they come from animals. The same way that we get fur and meat from animals. Where in animals does it come from? Well, it's in their bones. The animals have metals in their bones. What does that imply? Well, their bones can't just be made out of calcium. What else could bones be made out of? Well, if I look on the internet, not far from calcium are things like titanium and vanadium, which are very strong. There's carbon in bones too. There could be a simple process that turns that carbon into steel. Maybe we've discovered that process. Or the animals of the world have huge levels of carbon in their bones for some reason unknown. Maybe that's a mystery. Maybe we don't know why their bones are so carbon dense. And there we have that mystery moment, a question to explore, a reason we want to find out. Or we might say, where do metals come from? From animals, just the same way that we get fur and meat. What does that imply? Well, it implies that getting it from animals is easier and cheaper than mining the ground. What does that imply? Maybe that mining is very difficult. Maybe the planet is very seismically unstable. Or maybe the planet is very hard. Maybe it's made out of something incredibly hard to dig through, like gold. What does that imply? Well, if there was something under there, something we couldn't dig down into, we would have no way of knowing if there was anything under there until it was too late. These examples are setting up a whole world or culture or nation. We can do the same thing when we have our setting already partly worked out. Just like a minor character, or like we did with John above, we might suddenly need Jane to go somewhere or use something or encounter some art or object. All we have to do is ask questions. Let's imagine we're trying to add some character to a town. What do we know about this town so far? Well, it's on a map, it's by the sea. What does that mean? There's that question again. Well, it means that fishing is probably a primary industry. What does that mean? Well, they need fish to survive. What does that mean? Well, maybe they have a religious relationship with the fish population. Whatever threatens the population of the fish threatens them on a spiritual level as well as economics. So how religious is this relationship exactly? Let's find out. We've hit a mystery mode. Once again. We've hit and when we hit a question without an easy answer, that's your plot hook. If we were writing this for a setting or a book or a game, we might have originally created an adventure hook that was a bit boring, like this. The town depends on the fish population to survive, so we will hire adventurers to find out what's killing the fish. But now, thanks to our questions, we might have the locals are conducting religious ceremonies to try and get their fish population back to its original levels. Unscrupulous locals may kidnap the adventurers to be sacrifices. Kinder folks may beg the heroes to intervene or save others who are about to be sacrificed. Now we've got drama, not just another quest giver. We've got factions, we've got different people on the same issue, different positions on the same issue of a moral dilemma, and so on. Good stories and good worlds come from different points of view. We can also use these questions to connect elements into other parts of our world and make sure we are spotting all the ripples and interactions this world could have with our other concepts. For example, why do they have a fish religion? Well, they need to cast a spell to call the fish into the nets. And that requires, their magic requires a blood sacrifice because that's how their magic works. Can they change that? Well, they could start farming the fish instead, I suppose. Or just stop using magic. What does that change in turn? Maybe the wizards don't want them to do that. Maybe the wizards want the common folk to keep using magic, so the common folk keep needing the wizards. So maybe the wizards have a system in place to stop people from not using magic. What would that look like? What kind of system would stop people from using magic? Stop people from not using magic? Good question. Time to design a new faction. Or why do they have a fish religion? Well, they can't use normal magic to bring the fish in. Why not? Because those spells are too complex. They're locked away from simple peasants. Who locks them away? The big fishing guild of wizards. What does that imply? Well, if there's a fishing guild of wizards, there's probably a black market. And there may be a revolt in the works so that those spells can be accessible to everyone. What's the black market look like? What does black market for magic look like? Good question. Time to make some factions. Or why do they have a fish religion? Well, because they're running out of fish. They can't catch them the normal way. But there are magical spells that could keep everyone fed. Why does it matter to have fish? Sometimes those spells fail, I guess. Sometimes there aren't reliable magic. Well, where's the reliable magic? It's somewhere where there's more mages, perhaps the capital city. Would a society know that their magic could fail? Yes, probably. Wouldn't they have some system to guard against this? Yes, but like the magic, that system might not always work. So when things stop working, when the magic stops working, what do? How do they know, and who do they tell? Is it harder when you're farther away from the capital? Why does magic care about geography? These are all good questions. Who would we send to go and complain? None of these questions dismantle our predetermined ideas, but give us depth and development to them quickly. They also suggest opportunities for danger, for villainy, for choices, for points of view, and all excellent plot hooks. And they point towards wants, needs, great follies, and narrative choices. All the things that a world needs. Questions like these are about finding those narratives in your world on the micro and macro level and giving your world the real spark of life. Hope you enjoyed that. Thank you for the new subscribers. We'll be having a book launch for this in about a month at the Burwood Library. And every single chapter is about 2,000 to 3,000 words long with a little exercise at the end. And if people like, I'll do some more of these. So that's the asking questions technique. Great for characters in your stories. Great for world building. And now I must go off live.